Hey, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
So I'm an OG. Are you an OG?
I think I am. My mom says so. And welcome back to another episode of Two Guys Talking About Records. My name's Steve, and I am a record collector.
And I'm Jim, and I'm a record store owner, and we go together like peas and carrots.
Yes, we do. Us and Forrest Gump. Okay. Well, let's begin, as always, because we got a really exciting program today. I'm pretty excited about this one, but we always like to start with, what did we get this week? Because, you're a vinyl collector. You want to know what kind of stuff did we blow our money on. So what did you blow your money on, Jim?
Well, I had a couple things come into the store that ended up in the personal. One new, and one actually I picked up like 2 years ago, and there's a story behind it, so bear with me. You know that I'm kind of big into the Michigan vinyl, stuff like that. I like getting it in. We capture it if it doesn't exist and put it on our YouTube channel just to preserve some of these recordings. This one is called it's a 7-inch 45 called Sound Souvenir. It's a high-fidelity recording of Greenfield Village down in the Detroit area, the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village in Dearborn. And what this is, I'll just read the back. It says, "Here, recorded for your listening pleasure, are the sounds of world-famous Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. All the sounds of a typical American community of yesterday are here for you to enjoy." So it sounds like they just kind of carried a tape recorder around Greenfield Village and picked up natural sound of the museums and the stuff out there. It's narrated, of course, but it's basically like a little souvenir, so you can relive your time at Greenfield Village on a 45.
I'm glad you got that.
So I'll give it a listen. We'll put it up on YouTube. The other one, much more exciting. Not that I'm saying that's not exciting, but it's not exciting. This one is called High Atmosphere, and this actually came into the store, probably about 2 or 3 years ago. And when I looked it up on Discogs, it was a moderately expensive album, upwards in the $40 to $50 range, but it had a warp in it. So rather than pitch it, and because it was fairly valuable, I thought I'm just going to kind of stash this away if and when. And so it got buried on the shelf. Well, about 6 months ago, I bought one of these record flatteners, which is a whole nother episode that we're going to talk about, because I've met moderate success with this. Yeah. So the other day I was going through some of our back shelves, and I ran across some of the warped records I'd set aside that had some value to them. And I pulled this one back out. I thought, well, let's give it a try in the flattener. It was one of my success stories. It actually worked on this and is playable and is now flat and plays nice. So I'm going to keep this one because it's actually really neat. But the album is called High Atmosphere, and it is much like the Greenfield Village 45. This is a collection of field recordings done by someone named John Cohen from 1965. And it's banjo tunes and ballads that he recorded in the mountains of Virginia and North Carolina. So we're talking traditional early bluegrass. Yeah. And so what he did was go around the area in the Appalachians and record individuals. And it's really cool in the fact that one of the songs on here, and you're a fan, you've seen the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Yeah. The Coen brothers, another great Coen film, 2 weeks in a row we're talking here. There was the scene in the lynching scene with the KKK. One of the KKK members was singing a song called Oh Death, a traditional. That song, I did not realize it until I heard that song on this album, was actually called A Conversation with Death. Okay. And this gentleman, the John Cohen, who recorded this, he recorded this from another gentleman by the name of Lloyd Chandler in Sodom, North Carolina, who claims to be the original writer of that song, which had become known as Oh Death, but he called it A Conversation with Death. Now, this Chandler said that he wrote that in 1916, and he sung it for this gentleman, Cohen, recording it in 1965. And it's one of those songs, when you play it, in the movie Oh Brother, it's really kind of scary and moving. Yeah. On the record, without that KKK imagery on there, it's one of those that I'm looking here, I'm thinking about it, gives you goosebumps when you hear just the rendition of this guy singing about a conversation with death and Don't Take Me Now. It's very haunting, but very great. So this one having been fixed, has now worked its way into the personal collection. Long story short, but that's what's in mine.
And he really did get goosebumps on that.
I'll play it for you when we're set here. That's really neat. Interesting. How about you? Any earth-moving, goosebumpy stuff?
Well, I was more into that, how much money to spend, so I bought the Pink Floyd Pulse box set. That came from the collection of our good friend Bill Young. Yep. And so that was there. I used to have it in CD, so it was nice to get that in vinyl. There was a group called Crow, which I've heard them. I've seen it around. They had the album Crow Music.
Yep. Gave
that a shot. It's,
country, psych rock?
Kinda, blues or a little blues rock. I have to listen to a little bit more. I did find an original of The Breeders' Pop from 1990. It was a radio copy, so you have on there big WXRZ or whatever it is, so it was a little cheaper because of that, but the vinyl's beautiful. And then I was happy to get that. I mean, just, that album from, Kim Deal and Tanya Donnelly, just that was neat.
That's always great stuff.
Yeah, so that was pretty much my week.
That Pulse box set's going to take a while to get through. I've got one in my personal collection too, but it is just phenomenal. There's something about Live Floyd. We could probably do a whole episode on Live Floyd recordings, but that's one of those ones that's just, it's a very immersive box set. It's a very visual box set, as well as the music being great. So I'm glad you got a copy of that. It's a great record to have.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
But is it an original?
Ooh.
I think it is.
Yes. Okay.
In the Pulse box set it is.
Yes.
Those tend to be. So that leads us to our discussion today. When we say OG, for those of you not in the lingo, that does not stand for Original Gangsta, although I think, Steve, you may be at sometimes.
Yeah.
But it stands for original in the parlance of vinyl collecting. So I get a lot of questions from folks coming in, and they look at some of the used albums, and they look at some of the reissues, especially with the newer people coming in and getting into vinyl collecting. And the biggest question is, well, which is better? Is it better to have an original pressing, or is it better to have one of these brand new reissues that they repress every couple of years because demand is so high for it? And I always have to say, well, it depends. And then I go into a spiel. But I know this is a daily battle for you, especially given the fact what you went through with the flood several years ago, where you had a bunch of originals, and those are tough to replace.
I mean, I really, really love originals, but it gets to the point now, where I used to buy them in a budget bid, and now they want triple figures on all of these. Once in a while, I'll stumble across one, and I will do it, but for the most part, I can't. I can't afford it. And so I'm having to look at more a reissue or a repress. And, just a clarification, reissue and repress are two different things.
They are.
And sometimes, and that can get very, very confusing. A reissue is done by a different company. Someone else takes it, like a Third Man Record is doing a reissue on Blue Note right now.
Yep.
While the repress is being done by that same company. So the Blue Note Classics, those are a repress. They're doing them again.
If we really want to get technical too, sometimes a repress can also mean going back to the particular plates that they made the masters from and repressing off of that. But you can only do that so many times before the original plates get worn out.
Yep.
And so this gets us into the number of pressings of something. So the question, though, was, are originals better?
Yes. There are certain things I think that I like, especially with originals. And when you look at even original pressings, if it's from the 60s or earlier, it tends to be a better sound quality, because at that time there was such competition going on. They had master engineers everywhere. I mean, it was an important field. They were using real great quality vinyl. Then comes the 70s, and we have an oil shortage. We start to skimp back. Also, record companies, how can we make more product? What happens? The vinyl quality goes down. They started to lose some of the engineers. And by the 80s and 90s, the engineers were disappearing, and a lot of times the sound quality wasn't as good. And so when you look at an original as you're trying to rebuy, sometimes it's like these early ones, which is why they go for so much. Myself, though, I have this love of an original, to look at it, to feel it. This is what came out. This was the original thought of that album. To look at that artwork, even though a reissue looks exactly the same oftentimes, it's just, I have this. And there's certain instances, where I think of, like Velvet Underground, with Nico, the peeled banana. Now, you can buy lots of reissues with that peelable banana. But an OG has the picture of one of the people from Andy Warhol's factory that's on there that had to be brushed off, which makes it highly valuable. But that's the excitement of that OG. A Dead Kennedys original. When I think of Frankenchrist, it has the penis poster.
Yep.
None of the rest, even the represses or reissues, don't have that. That brings the excitement of that original.
Sometimes finding these is like you come across this, holy cow, I can't believe I found this. But you did mention it's getting tougher and tougher, especially to find them in fairly decent price range. And again, speaking from the side of the record store owners, like when these come in, I'm happy because I know that these are going to be a higher value, higher dollar album. But the vinyl quality does come into play on this as well, because one of the other things is like the newer people especially say, well, this vinyl is brand new. It's never been touched by a needle. And then here we have this copy of, like, say, Rumors that is now, getting close to 50 years old as well, saying, or is it over 50, saying, I forget my dates on this one, well, how many times has a needle been played through this particular record? Mm-hmm. So while the originals may sound better originally because they're mastered by the master, so to speak, the other ones have never been played. You see where I'm getting at with this? Yeah. The needle wear does come into play on that, but still, you have to make that choice. But do I want something that sounds absolutely pristine, or do I want to know that this was the original intent and the way that this was meant to be listened to?
Jim, that's a great point, and we've talked about that before, and that really made me even kind of rethink things, because I really was wanting a lot of OGs, but go, you know what? Oftentimes, maybe that reissue would sound better unless you found something that was truly pristine out there. Also, the part of it comes down to income. What can you afford? If you are a newer collector, these OGs, some of them are just out of bounds for you. But the music's so great, it is being offered at a lot less price. So, you have that. I think people with stereo, high-end stereo equipment, especially when you look at some of these 60s, originals, they can put that on. They can hear the difference. But for $200, I just bought this from Third Man Record. They did a reissue on a jazz album. It goes for a medium price of $700 on Discogs.
The original.
An original. You can buy it, but I bought mine for $20-some. It sounds wonderful to my ears.
Earlier we talked about the engineers and how it was truly an art form into the 60s and 70s. And now the buzz name that comes around is the Robert Ludwigs, especially with things like Zeppelin. Folks don't realize that, especially in those the salad days, the golden years of vinyl in the 60s and 70s with all of these great rock bands, how important it was to have an engineer that not only understood the music and could interpret the way that the artists wanted their records to be heard, but could translate that into the vinyl. Because it's not just, believe me, it's a lot more technical than just saying, we're going to record it and put it on the record. It has to be done in such a fashion so as not to blow out the high end or not to distort the low end, which is a completely different animal when it comes to digital recording, because so much of the spectrum of the audio is just kind of mashed together or cut out or omitted because of the physical space. But putting it on a piece of vinyl took some real effort on the part of these engineers to make them sound good. And so that's why, even if you're really going to get nitpicky, you're going to say, okay, well, who was this engineered by? This Zeppelin 4 engineered by Ludwig is going to sound better than this repress that was done by whoever else in the late 70s.
the engineers are now back, and so you hear more of, Bernie Grundman. We've talked about how he seems to do 1 billion albums a year. We just kind of scratch our head. Steven Wilson from Porcupine Tree is just come huge reissuing. You think the whole Jethro Tull catalog he's been doing. Some people say it gets a little maybe too bright. He's messing with it a little bit, but yet he's doing a ton of them. Mikey Most out of Australia does tons of them down there, and Miles Sholwell was another person. I think he's out of the UK. Just these master engineers that a collector, a real deep collector will look at. And on the Discogs page, of course, you can go in and find out who engineered these.
Yep.
It makes a difference. Value. Look at a Robert Ludwig Zeppelin goes for billions of dollars, while the other ones,
It comes down to it. But again, I've got to stress that you could have a Robert Ludwig Led Zeppelin or even a new Steven Wilson remix of a Jethro Tull, and if the vinyl has not been properly cared for, it negates that entire quality.
Yes, and you what you will have is just, I got the cover art. And for some, that's the whole thing with an OG is you display it. Yep. On the front of my cases, I have my favorite OG albums. There they are. It's just, they mean a lot to me. It is like artwork. Some of them, the vinyl's great. Some of them, maybe it's not so great. But it's just this, look at that. I have this, and it makes me feel really good. And, if you have great stereo equipment, I got good stereo, but it's not like the greatest one in the world. But, those that really have it, they can take an OG and then buy a repress. You can put it on, you can listen to. And if you can tell a difference, then that's the route you go. But if you can't, might as well do a repress, because what difference does it make?
Well, herein lies the other thing, too, with a lot of serious collectors. And I'm going to be guilty of this as well. I have got, let's say, for example, I've got 2 original copies of Pink Floyd's Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason I have 2 is because one is a UK press and one is a US press, and they are different. The covers look about the same, the backs are a little different, but the song lineup is different because the record label wanted, for whatever reason, to rearrange the music. And I think they omitted 1 or 2 songs on the US copy and replaced them with something else. So from that standpoint, as a collector, I like my Floyd stuff as well. It's kind of important to me to have these 2 variations of an original. That being said, they're tremendously valuable. Do I want to toss them on every time I want to hear? So I buy a reissue as a play copy. Now, is that a little excessive? Yes, in some cases. But for some albums that are important to me, and they're very important and maybe important enough to only play once or twice, a year, well, I can listen to the other one as often as I want without having to worry about damaging it.
I do that all the time, too. We'll just go back to that very first Velvet Underground. I have a reissue of it. That is the one that I'm going to play. The other one I'm just going to look at. Zamrock, I have some original of this African Zamrock music. Now, it's really crackly and pop because that's the way it is, but it comes out as a reissue. I buy the reissue so I can enjoy it. Now, I just paid a whole bunch of money for that original. And so, it again, if luckily my wife never watches my videos or listens to the podcast because she just, what? But, it's this pride of having this and the excitement, but to sit there and listen to it, you really don't want to wear it out.
And I know that defeats the purpose. Records are made to be listened to. Another great story I like to tell is, that I'm a Rush fan. There was a Rush album called Snakes and Arrows that came out, 20 some odd years ago now. And the original version of that was a 180 gram version. And for whatever reason, I didn't buy that when it came out. I usually would get them, but it was a time in my life when I was like, well, I'm doing digital. I bought the reissue, which ended up being a 200 gram reissue, which now is still in the $200 range. But I never had an OG. So when I got back into seriously collecting those, I went looking for that original Rush Snakes and Arrows. And a customer who shows up once a year had some. He actually, some being the operative word. He says, I've got like 6 sealed ones. And so we worked a deal. This is, he borderlines on being a hoarder. So we're not going to talk about that. But long story short, we'd worked a trade where I gave him some collectibles. And I got this sealed OG of Rush, Snakes and Arrows. Next time I talked to him, he knew I had another copy, a reissue. He says, what do you think of that? And I said, well, I opened it up and played it. It sounds great. He goes, he was aghast. You opened it up? You played it? And I'm like, yeah, I did. But I've only played it once, maybe twice in the couple of years I've had it, because I'll play the reissue. But I had to listen to it. I had to.
Future episode, Are You a Vinyl Hoarder? Coming your way soon. All right.
I've got some stories on that.
Yep.
We'll let go. But back to the originals versus the reissues.
Well, and some will, they look at the reissue, and a lot of the reissues are now 180 gram. I remember when 180 gram first came out, I go, ooh, that's 180 gram. This must be super special. And I was like, everybody puts out 180 gram. Some will say a 180 sounds better. Some will say they can't tell the difference. A 180 doesn't warp. It's harder to warp. You have to work at it harder to get that thing to warp. But they just, with this thicker vinyl, is it a better sound? Some say yes, some say no. I don't.
Again, I think it comes down to how serious are you about having just that original. I want something that I know was the first to be out there. I think another avenue to look at this, too, is that, especially with some of these bigger groups, let's go back to Pink Floyd, for example, you have a difference between a first pressing and an early reissue. So something that was extremely popular, like A Dark Side of the Moon, when it first came out in 74, was then repressed again in 75, 76, 77, 78. These can all be differentiated if you really dig into Discogs carefully and look. But there's really no reason to say that something that was repressed a year or two after the original release is going to sound that much different than the original.
Yeah. Yep. It's unless they wore out those tapes, but they do have a few different copies of them, I believe. Another thing I've seen, especially now, is they're reissuing so many different albums. And I think of Roberta Flack. Roberta Flack, they reissued First Take. So Roberta Flack First Take, you can find in a bargain bin. A Discog medium price is $5 if you want an original. You can get that, $5. You can now go and you can get one of the new reissues for $25. Now, generally speaking, I've seen very clean albums of, the vinyl's very clean on these because they weren't played like tons. So there is many instances now where I'm seeing these reissues coming in at a lot higher price than what you can buy an original. On our last broadcast, I talked about Sly and the Family Stone I got, So There's a Riot Going On. It came from Vinyl Me Please. I have an original. My original, the medium price is $45. Now, the Vinyl Me Please, this just came in. The original right now goes for $39. So here's brand new. So here's a case where, okay, the original does cost more, though the Vinyl Me Please is very nice and very good looking. But yet the Roberta Flack, when you go that route, it's like, why not try to get an original instead of this? But some people don't want to look. They don't want to do it. They come in. I just want it right now. You get that all the time in the store.
I do. And they want I want a brand new copy of something. But it's mystifying to me, every week when we go through our orders and I look at the upcoming releases. We do that new release show every Saturday here on our YouTube channel. What I don't include are the dozens and dozens of reissues of albums that regularly show up in the $1 to $2 to $3 bin.
Yeah.
And things like a Kenny Loggins or James Taylor stuff that's so plentiful out there, and it's in great condition usually in the $3 to $4 range, that it's mystifying to me that the labels say, well, you know what we think? We think people are going to want to spend $30 on a Jim Croce reissue simply because we put it on colored vinyl.
Yes. Yeah. When I think of reissues, I think, okay, for the most part, they can be affordable. For the most part, they're very accessible. You're easy to get at. You can find them. Generally speaking, there can be an improved sound quality because the other ones might have been 40, 50 years old, really, really played a long time. You never know, though, was the source from a CD, was the source from digital?
A digital remaster.
Yes.
You got to be careful of that.
Yep. But when I look at an OG, I think, okay, serious collector. They want an OG. That's what they want. Sentimental value is really important to a collector. It's, that's why you want an OG. I think Uskadu, I just recently had gotten a New Day Rising. I had lost that one in the flood, so I went and, I could have got a reissue, but I was able to get an OG of that. That had sentimental value. I paid a lot more for it, but that album meant a lot to me. As I said, you put it on display, also just there it is.
The other thing that could come out of this too, especially someone in your position where you had, or let's say, every week I hear stories from customers that come in and say, oh, I got rid of all my records and I really regret it, so I'm trying to rebuild. I mean, that's a very common thing to do. When CDs came about, people dumped their stuff. And maybe there was some good original first pressings in that collection that at the time they got rid of for pennies on the dollar, which everybody regrets. I got rid of stuff I regret. You could get a reissue as really a placeholder. Let's say it's something that's not a tremendous value like the Floyd for me or the Velvet Underground for you, where you're going to protect that first pressing. But let's say that you get something that, well, this is an album I really enjoyed. I'm going to get this reissue, and if I ever come across an OG that's reasonable, I'll get that, and we'll get rid of the reissue somehow, take it and trade it.
Yeah, I do. I've had to do that a lot since the flood. I've been buying stuff, and I keep looking to try to find an original. Where kind of worries me with this is I saved 400 or 500 vinyl albums. I lost the cover, so I just have the album. And some of these are so rare, I can't find covers. So I buy a reissue just to drop it in with the cover, but
it's not the same.
Yeah, it's not the same. The cover looks exactly the same, but yet it is not the same. And if you ask someone that's not a vinyl collector, they just go, "Are you nuts? That is the same. Don't be stupid about it." But it's not. And when you think of the value, I mean, okay, well, I got a different cover. It looks just like the other cover. Is it as valuable? But it's not.
And we've talked about this too, and I think we'll toss this idea around, but we're gonna do a complete episode on mixing and matching covers and vinyls for upgrading covers. You've got a special circumstance, but I know that there are people that do it just because. But that's a real contentious issue with me. Yeah. But I understand why you do what you do with that. And to your credit, especially on your YouTube channel, when you pull something out that you got in, say, I have the original vinyl of this. You pull it out from behind. Here it is. Here's my reissue. Someday I'll find that other cover.
Yeah, that's just something you search for. Now, if only I could remember it. I guess I do have a big list. Maybe I should just bring that with me sometime.
The idea, though, of the emotional attachment, I think, is something that really comes down to the type of collector that you are. And for me personally, I think I vary as the type of collector, and I think you do too. Mm-hmm. There are some groups, there are some artists, there are some albums specifically that it's more important to have that original, just because that emotional attachment you mentioned, versus other items in that catalog or other albums in the collection. I'm good with the reissue. And I don't mean to be, it's like, I like the album, I'll go to it and play it, but it doesn't matter to me that much whether it's old or new.
Velvet Underground is one where I have all originals of everything. It does. There is this, and I didn't get into the Velvet Underground to the mid-'80s, but the music connected to me so much that I wanted originals for everything. And luckily, at your store, through the years, you have been able to supply me with every original album. But it's been incredible. There are certain groups like that, but I was a huge Talking Heads fan. You can find it out there. I'm okay with the reissue, and some of them sound really good. They had the Rocktober ones, yep. And I had them. Now, I've slowly got in, I think, originals on them, but it wasn't as big. And though I'm huge, I love that group, it just didn't have the excitement of some of the other groups that I were to get, like Uskadu, to get an original of that. And maybe because it's just a little more out on left field. Mm-hmm. And that might be it's not as common. And so that can create me some of that sentimentality with it.
It sounds like both you and we're going to have to do some research and or talk to some sort of psychologist about why it is that collectors act in certain ways. I don't have an answer for it. I really wish I could say, why is it important? My wife understands, and yours maybe to some extent in there too. But why is it important for me to have two different first pressing copies of a Pink Floyd album that I never listened to?
Clash is like that. The Clash, the UK and the English version, always messed up. I have them both.
Yep.
Have to have them both. It's just the way it is. With these reissues, and there is a lot coming up. And it's nice to see the reissuing so much from the 90s and from the aughts, where really the vinyl was hard to get. And I mean, you're always bringing in a bunch of this stuff. And if you're on a tight budget, it's great. I mean, it is a wonderful way to learn music, to expand your collection, and there is nothing better than what they're doing on reissuing this. Though I still have a hard time with that Roberta Flack, where I can buy it for $5 instead of $25. But, oftentimes an OG is not available. So that really, to me, makes a big difference. Also, a lot of times it's not about showing off the records. You just want to buy it to listen to it.
Yep.
That's the most important part, which it is, except if you're the one gentleman that had all those box sets where you don't ever open it, and obviously listening was not a key thing to him. Do you hear a difference? I personally am not the one to ever ask, can you tell the difference between these two pressings? I'll just go, my ears aren't in tune to that. I hear the music. I know what I like. I don't spend a lot of time on it, though some of these new remixes I know are better. There's certain albums that were done really muddy. Listen to it, especially some of the punk stuff. They've reissued it. They've taken it. They've brightened it up better so you can hear the instrumentation. There is a lot of cases where these engineers have taken crappy sounding recordings that were done and have improved upon them. And the reissue becomes much better than the other, though still the other one's an OG. But
I'm chuckling at this because another Pink Floyd album comes to mind. One of my favorite mid-Floyd albums is Animals. Mm-hmm. And it had been repressed several times. And I love the original, but a couple of years ago, about a year ago, they reissued it with a remix. Now, the remix had David Gilmour's fingers in it, but not Roger Waters. And so what you ended up getting was what I think Gilmour had talked about, that Richard Wright's stuff was brought much more forward, where Roger Waters wanted his vocals and his stuff to be first and foremost. So given the fact that, the legal troubles that they all went through, this remixed version of Pink Floyd Animals, to me, was almost a different record because it sounded so much different from the original, meaning that the keyboards were up. The drums were still there, but maybe a little different. The sound effects, especially on an album like Animals, the sound effects of the animals, the dogs and the sheep, were much more prevalent. And it was a different vision, I think, that was muddled by the infighting in the group when the album was originally mixed.
Which one do you prefer?
That's a toughie.
Yeah.
The original is a go-to. I love that album. I'll go and I'll play that original constantly. It's one of those ones. The new one, maybe I'm just not used to it, but every time I listen to it, it's like, wait a minute, that's not right. But I'm getting used to it. So I think it's a toss-up. I like the original because that was the original intent, but it's interesting to see the artist's reinterpretation, especially if somebody like Gilmour, who's still around and can still have his input put into this. If you get estates like the Prince estate working on stuff, then it gets a little odd because it's no longer that artist's intent.
I totally agree. And I would say that original has sentimentality to you.
Yeah,
because
it does.
That's the mix you grew up with.
Yep.
But it is fun when you can hear something new and different on an album that maybe you weren't aware of.
The psychology of listening as well. We mentioned the Talking Heads. For the longest time when I did college radio, the song Take Me to the River by the Talking Heads, the station copy had a skip in it.
Okay.
And so whenever we played it on the air, you'd have to get to it and you'd fade it down and you'd pass by the skip. To this day, when I hear it digitally on my iPod or phone, when that spot comes up, I expect to hear the skip. And it's not there, and it's a little disconcerting to me.
You would have think maybe they just could have bought you another copy, I guess.
It was college radio.
Yeah.
We were so poor, we took what we got. Again, let's dive into the psychology of it. Maybe if you're a psychologist, not an armchair, but an actual certified, you can tell us what's wrong with both Steve and our brains here.
Feel free to write in, and we'll try to get you on to help us out here.
All right. Well, Steve, as always, another fantastic. I am an OG guy, but I'm not. How's that? Does that sum it up?
I am an OG guy, but I'm not also. Yes, it does.
So there's something wrong with us, but
Yes.
we're vinyl guys, so that's a given.
Yes.
You have been listening to two guys lamenting about records. Is that? No, we're talking about
Yeah,
it.
we're talking. Right. A little lamenting going on.
Okay. So until next time, this is Jim. I'm a record store owner.
And Steve, a record collector. Have a great week.
Thanks, folks.